Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. The topic of today's webinar is sensory diets and sensory processing issues. My name is Andrew Lee, and I'm part of the Understood team, and I'm really happy to welcome to us Keri Wilmot. She's an occupational therapist and an Understood expert. Hi, Keri. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Andrew?
I'm great. Could you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your background, Keri?
Yep, I'm a pediatric occupational therapist. I've been working with children for the last 15 years in a variety of settings. I've worked with children in their home, I've worked with children in the public school system, and I've worked with kids of all ages as part of an outpatient sensory integration clinic that's been associated with a children's hospital.
Awesome. I think you're going to bring a lot of great expertise to our audience today. And if you are watching, I just want to encourage you to either just say hi or ask your questions in the chat box. Feel free to tell us who you are, your name, and where you're from, or you can always ask anonymously. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Keri to start our webinar.
Okay, so today we're talking about sensory processing. So sensory information comes into our lives from the world around us. So we all know about our traditional five senses, the sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell. So think about a time that you've maybe walked into the grocery store. You can see all the different colors of fruits and vegetables. You might hear sounds of people bustling around you or talking over the loudspeaker. You can touch different fruits and vegetables. They have different feelings. They have different textures. Maybe they're offering samples, or you can smell the citrus fruits that are around you in the area. So when we go into different situations, sensory information is all around us. As occupational therapists, we include two additional senses. One is our sense of movement, which is called our vestibular sense, and that is our sense of balance, which is housed in our inner ear. Another sense that we have is called proprioception, and there's small receptors that are located in our joints and in our muscles that give us a sense of body awareness. They tell us kind of where we are in the world and how quickly we need to move, how we need to grade our movements, and they just give us information about where we relate to things that are around us. So what is sensory processing? So a lot of people talk about sensory processing as almost having a traffic cop in your brain, and that traffic cop is controlling the information that's coming into it. So we get information just like we did in the grocery store from lights and sounds and experiences. And so we, need to know whether we need to make sense of that information or not. And so when the senses work together in harmony, we have good sensory processing. So maybe you're in the grocery store and the person that's next to you drops a bag of apples. And at the same time, the blender from the cafe goes on, and there's a lot of information that starts to happen. That traffic cop, maybe you jump and you scream and you say, "Oh my goodness, something happened." But the traffic cop will help you understand once you look. Oh, okay, the apples fell. Let's help her pick that up. Oh, okay, maybe there was noise in the background. Okay, everything's okay. I can go back to shopping. So that is really what good sensory processing is. It's being able to react, and maybe we don't always have the best response right away, but we learn from that situation. So the next time we're shopping in the grocery store and something happens, we don't overreact. So what is sensory processing disorder? Some people call it SPD. It's a term that we would use to describe for people, can be children or adults, anybody that has difficulty organizing those responses to sensory information. And sometimes people are oversensitive to situations. So while you might barely hear noise in the background, there might be some kids covering their ears saying, "It's too loud, it's too loud." So maybe they pay attention to different information in their world that some people barely notice. You might put a pair of socks on and they might be screaming that they just don't feel right. They sometimes will overreact to things that are going on around them. So as an occupational therapist, we are trained to help parents identify sensory processing disorder. So what often usually happens is a parent might have concerns. They would bring their information up to maybe their pediatrician, and they would get a referral for an occupational therapy evaluation. And during our evaluation, we gather a lot of information. So we're going to give children things to do. We're going to have them pick up things, put things down, carry activities. We're going to check their muscle strength and their coordination. And we're going to watch about different situations and how they respond. We talk a lot to parents and ask different questions about, well, what happens when you go to a family party? Are they able to deal with noise? Or, can you, as a family, do you like to go out to dinner in a restaurant? Or is it too hard for your child to, pay attention when there's a lot of stimulation that's going on around them? We would also give parents a standardized checklist. So it might ask different questions about things that children may experience throughout the course of their day. And a parent might check off whether they always, frequently, occasionally, or never have a reaction to that situation. But what's important is that we need to consider how a child functions in different environments. Some kids do great at home, but when they get to school, they get really overwhelmed because there's more stimulation in their environment. There's more people, there's different noises, there's things that happen that cause them to react. And as those situations occur throughout the course of the day, it gets harder and harder for them to cope and to pay attention and to function. So a sensory diet is actually, I like to think of it as a treatment strategy. It's something that we would design as occupational therapists to help children with an identified sensory processing disorder. So it's a term that was coined by an occupational therapist named Patricia Wilbarger. And a sensory diet is made up of strategies and activities that kids will receive throughout the day in order to help them focus. So it is kind of like a food diet, but it's not necessarily about, eating something. It's about planning and preparing for the kind of information that we give children throughout the day so that they don't get overstimulated. And we take into consideration, through that evaluation, what are their areas of weakness? Is there a sense that's a little bit more overreactive than others? And what can we do to help them get through the day so that they're focused and organized? Our sensory processing is really directly related to our arousal level. So as occupational therapists, we talk about many times a just right state. So if you look at the chart, the just right state is really that area in the middle, which is the optimal range of arousal. That's where learning and attention can happen. That is a child who's, they're not overstimulated, they're not understimulated, they're really in a perfect place to, take information in and produce a response that they should. So down at the bottom where you see sensory events, this graph just shows over the course of time how a sensory event can impact somebody's arousal level. So maybe that first triangle is when somebody woke up in the morning and they didn't get off to a great start and their clothing is itchy and scratchy, but they got through it and they went to school. And then all of a sudden, the two triangles in the middle might have been a fire alarm that happened unexpectedly. It was a fire drill that they were practicing and they didn't know about it. And all of a sudden it just, set them into a state of panic. But they got through it and they moved on. And then you as a parent sometimes maybe decide, today's a great day. We'll go pick up the kids from school and go get haircuts. And that haircut is something that is, the child doesn't like the way the clippers feel or the buzzers feel. So I guess the key point when you look at the arousal system and you look at kids over time is that your sensory state and your sensory arousal level will change based upon things that go on in your life. So through a sensory diet, we can prevent things like sensory overload and, get kids that might have a low arousal level a little bit more alert, so that they can, get through the day and function.
Keri, this is Andrew. I had a quick question about the graph.
Sure.
The section on the bottom which says low arousal, could you talk a little bit about what that might, I think many people, parents might understand sort of being overstimulated or sensory overload, but what does it mean to sort of be low arousal?
Yep, sometimes low arousal are kids that are almost lethargic. It takes them, they're really grumpy in the morning. It takes them a significant amount of time to want to wake up and get moving. They're kind of sluggish. So it's really related to just being a little bit more lethargic and really needing a lot more time and a lot more input for them to register what's going on around them.
Okay, great.
So how can a sensory diet help? So what we have found out with doing these exercises is that information through exercises that we give to the muscles and joints can actually have a lasting impact on attention, sometimes for even several hours after we offer these exercises to kids. And while a sensory diet is helpful for children with an identified sensory processing disorder, because many of these exercises are help with a child's attention, they can also be a great resource for kids with learning and attention difficulties. So some principles of a sensory diet is, a lot of parents will tell me how, yes, I know that my child likes to put things in their mouth, so I give them gum to chew or something else to chew on, or they have trouble falling asleep at night, so maybe we give them a weighted blanket and that helps them fall asleep. And those are certainly great treatment strategies that are part of a sensory diet, but a sensory diet is really a lifestyle. What we like to do for kids is we don't want them to get to the point of overstimulation. We don't want them to react. So we want to be preventative. So we're going to give them these structured breaks throughout the day. Maybe they have 3 or 4, 15 to 20 minute time frames per day where they engage in some what we would call motor breaks. So they're activities where they might do different yoga poses or stretches or jumping jacks to help get some of their energy out so that they can come down maybe from being in an overloaded state or build arousal level and get into that just right area. And what we know is that many of these helpful exercises are head inverted exercises. So that's kind of like when you do a somersault or you tip your head down to the ground and you stand back up again. Anything that will change your head positioning. And then we also know that when you do head inversion and you use as many muscle groups as possible, meaning kids are using their arms, their legs, their feet, as many muscle groups as we can recruit, combined with the head inversion, that is really powerful input that we can let kids experience that will help them sustain and gain attention a lot faster. There's all sorts of different exercises. Some just happen to be a little bit more powerful than others. And as I mentioned before, there's additional sensory strategies that we would add to a sensory diet. And maybe they might be fidget toys for kids to hold on to, or a weighted blanket that they can sleep with at night, different clothing, like a tight-fitting sports shirt that they can wear to help keep them calm under their regular clothing, and sometimes things like noise-canceling headphones or gum to chew. So right now we're going to talk about some exercise examples so that you have some ideas of activities that you can do with your kids at home to kind of help them get into that just right state. So the idea behind many of these exercises too is that they're pretty simple. I like to give parents strategies where you're not using a lot of equipment, that you can use what you have around you, even if it's just your own body. So jumping jacks is a great first example. Many people are familiar with those. Kids, place their hands on their hips. They move their legs open and closed while they raise their arms up over their head at the same time. Younger kids might put their hands on their hips and just move their legs, or even thinking about changing a jumping jack and turning it into something like a snow angel. So for kids who are learning about coordination, they can lie on the ground and then move their arms and legs at the same time. The next activity are therapy ball exercises. Therapy balls or yoga balls or Pilates balls are pretty inexpensive. They're usually around under $10. You can find them at most retail stores. And there's lots of exercises that kids can do with them. They might sit on the ball with their feet on the ground while they bounce up and down and clap their hands. Or maybe some kids like to lie on their belly over the ball, or they like to lie on their back over the ball and tip their head backwards while their feet are on the ground in front of them. Just make sure there's an adult nearby. Sometimes kids get a little too excited when they're on the therapy ball, but for the most part, they really seem to enjoy those kinds of exercises. The next group of exercises are called animal walks. So maybe kids pretend to walk like a bear on their hands and feet, or they lie on their belly on the ground and slither like a snake from one place to another. They can crab walk by lying on sitting down and then putting their feet on the ground, their arms on the ground, and walking forward. usually with animal walks, I'll suggest parents set up like 2 areas and walk a distance of maybe like 10 feet in between. So they're moving and walking from point A to point B. The next exercise would be a downward dog pose. So this is really a yoga pose that most people or many people that do yoga are familiar with, but it's a great activity because it uses all muscle groups and it also includes head inversion. So it provides a lot of sensory input pretty quickly as kids are balancing on their hands and feet and then they're dropping their head below. So again, you don't need equipment. And some of these poses I would suggest maybe encouraging kids to hold for 10 seconds. The next activity is a plank yoga pose. So children might lie on their stomach. They'll put their hands or their forearms on the ground and try to lift their belly up and support their weight on their toes like a plank. Again, it's using all the muscle groups. And because you're doing a lot of sustained input over a period of time, it gives kids a lot of information to the receptors and their joints and their muscles called that's that proprioceptive input. It can actually be pretty calming. And again, here I would suggest that they hold the pose for 10 seconds or as long as they can actually. Pushing the wall is a lot of fun, actually. Kids really seem to like it, and it doesn't take much to find a wall. So they just stand at the wall, put 2 hands on the wall, and push for as hard as they can for 10 seconds. Maybe they want to stand sideways and push their shoulder against the wall, or they can stand with their back against the wall, squat down a little bit, and sit like a chair. Again, it's really just a lot of sustained input against the wall using as many muscles as they can over a period of time. And the next exercise is a fan favorite. It's called the dead bug yoga pose. And kids lie on their back. It's also very similar, if you know yoga, to a happy baby pose, where you lie on your back, you put your hands on your feet, and at the same time that you try to push your feet up, you use your hands to try to pull them back down. So again, kids are getting a lot of sensory input to their receptors because they're getting them through their back, they're getting them through their arms and their legs, and it's also a really great calming strategy. So now that we know, or now that you've learned some different exercises to do, the idea behind the sensory diet is putting those exercises together in something like an obstacle course. So a lot of times I'll have kids pick 3 or 4 different exercises, and then we complete them in sequence like a circuit. So maybe they might do jumping jacks and frog jumps and a plank pose followed by a dead bug pose. So they're taking 3, they're doing them in order, and then they may repeat the same sequence 2 or 3 different times. Sometimes we decide on how many times we're going to repeat the circuit. Sometimes we set a time frame for how long, maybe we don't have 10 to 15 minutes, maybe we only have 5, but we set a timer, and however quickly they go through them is how they get through them. So we're actually going to show a video of a little boy who is doing some of the same exercises that I just talked about.
That's a really nice video. I think it illustrates really well what you've been talking about and makes it very approachable for parents. One question I did have, one of our users did have, is so these exercises are great, and I think this user is using them at home, but they have a child who's needs more activity. I guess they're have a lot of issues with low arousal, and they're concerned because the school doesn't seem to allow some of those activities. Now, I'm going to separate this into 2 questions. Sorry to make this more complicated, but
okay.
The first part of this is whether it can be allowed by the school, and that's a question I think for the user who asked that is please join us for one of our advocacy chats. Then you can get that addressed, like talking to the school about making accommodations. But for Keri, I want to ask: are there other exercises that are maybe are less sort of dramatic that kids can do to sort of up their stimulation at school? And any suggestions for this particular user?
Right, sure. I mean, definitely talk to the school system. I think a lot of school systems sometimes it depends on the teacher and whether the child has an IEP and whether these strategies are kind of written into their plan throughout the day. Because for some kids, these strategies are in their IEP and therefore they they are provided and they have to be provided because that's something that they need to function in that particular environment. But, sometimes kids, I've taught a lot of kids how to do these exercises, and maybe they request a break to kind of when they go to the bathroom, or they have time in their day and natural breaks throughout the day. And then they might, head to the bathroom and on that walk, take a couple seconds, push the wall, and just do some of these stretches in the hallway. So as much as it's, helpful that the school system can remind kids to offer it, I think it's important that we teach them about how their body reacts to different input, and that they also can have some control over their arousal system as well. Some kids like to sit in their chair and they put their hands on their chair and they try to lift their bottom up off the chair. They might hold their hands in their lap and, push back and forth while their hands are clasped together, just to get different information throughout the day to help them sustain their attention as much as they can. Actually, and another part with school too is, I've talked a lot with kids about what they do on the playground if they have a break. Are they, do they have equipment on their playground? Okay, well, what kind of obstacle course can we set up for you when you're out on the playground that you can remember to do? Do you go up climb up the slide, go down the slide, run around the outside, and then hop 5 times? So it's really, I think, also teaching kids that they have the power and the control to help their sensory system as well.
The parent who asked that question said, "Thank you for that answer, Keri." And I just wanted to, because I think it is a really important point. What you're saying is that maybe there are portions of the day that it's more acceptable to do a jumping jack, for example, like you're saying it maybe at the bathroom break or at recess.
Right.
Okay. So I hope to the parent who asked that question, thank you. And if you have any follow-ups, please do pop them in the chat box for Keri. And I'll hand it back to Keri to continue.
Okay. So these are just some more sensory diet tips and things to keep in mind, is that every child is different. Every child's traffic cop is a little bit different. Every situation is different. So while some of these things sort of look like a recipe, the general idea is that we have some structure to what we're doing, but that the different exercises are maybe modified based upon the child's interests. And many kids are really great at telling you what they like and what they don't like. And, when you ask them, well, what would you prefer to do? Would you rather do jumping jacks or would you rather do a dead bug? So they'll give you information on what it is that they like. To me, I don't think you need to have a lot of expensive equipment. Certainly things that we would have in a sensory clinic, like swings or bolster balls or speech therapy balls, they give kids a lot of great sensory input, and it's important. But you can, follow a sensory diet throughout the child's day without the equipment, as long as you're doing things consistently. And again, maybe you come up with a list of exercises that you like to do this month, and then you find different ones to do next month. A lot of times I also print out different pictures of exercises that the kids like to perform, and I let them, maybe I set up a piece of paper with 3 different boxes, and they get to pick the 3 exercises, and then they get to pick the order. I think it's important for kids to have some control in the situation, because that's going to help their success if they feel they're invested. Plus, they also can, like I had said before, they can give us really valuable information about how their system reacts. And kids will tell you, oh, I'm able to sit much longer after I, do these 3 exercises and then I sit down. Or I really like to do, 25 sit-ups and then the plank. So they have their preferences, and I think it's important to reward them and to commend them for sharing them. As kids get older, I think, the idea is we have other strategies that we can give them, but we want this sensory diet, we want this routine to be as typical as possible. Many kids don't want to have things that allow them to look different, especially once they get into middle school. So, the more we can teach them with some typical strategies that are around them in their world, I think that is ideally the ultimate goal. And then the other piece to really look at is the child's routine throughout the day. So it's great that we offer them these, motor break strategies and these sensory diet strategies, and then we get them ready and focused and ready to learn. So we want to just make sure that what we follow the exercises up with is something that's important that might be difficult for them. So maybe math is hard for them. They have a hard time paying attention to the concepts. It's overwhelming. It's stressful. So we would maybe want to schedule this sensory diet routine throughout the course of their day, right before math class, so that we're putting them in the best place possible to, so that they can learn and attend without being overwhelmed or overstimulated. So there are some other sensory diet strategies that we've talked about a little bit before earlier in the presentation, and some of them are called, the first one is called fidget toys. So these are generally small items that we might encourage a child to hold. Maybe it's putty that's shown in the picture there that they can squeeze, or maybe there's stress balls or ooey gooey prickly balls or kinetic sand or Play-Doh, something that they can put in their hands to move back and forth, and that can also help them calm down if they're feeling overwhelmed, or to help keep their arousal level at a good state. The next item are pressure clothing and weighted items. So there's a lot of weighted materials. There's weighted blankets, there's weighted belts, there's weighted lap pads, weighted animals. It's kind of like when you go to the dentist and and you have your x-rays and they put that really super heavy blanket on you to make sure that you don't get any radioactive information. It's that idea behind something being really heavy that really kind of helps calm our arousal level down. So it provides a lot of that firm, deep pressure input to our bodies over the course of time. So maybe some kids fall asleep with a weighted blanket, or they sit at circle time with a heavy weighted lizard on their lap, or maybe they sit at their desk with a weighted belt. Sometimes we also, something that's a little bit more easily accessible to find, are tight-fitting sport shirts. So you can go to any sporting goods store and find one of those really, super tight, maybe cold gear or warm gear shirts that kids can wear. We sometimes suggest parents buy it a little bit snugger than usual, and they can wear it underneath their regular clothes. And it helps give them sustained deep pressure throughout the course of the day. And then the last one is oral sensory input. Many kids actually chew on things to really help them keep their arousal level. A lot of kids, are able to chew gum, or they might chew on a toy, or they chew on their shirt sleeves so that they can help focus their attention. So what we want to do for those kids is just make sure that we're allowing them to get that sensory input through a way that sometimes is maybe a little bit more appropriate. So I often suggest to parents that you plan their snacks and lunches. Maybe try to include some crunchy or chewy foods in their meals, like bagels or raw vegetables. And again, this is another area where you can, watch your children eat or talk to them about what they like to eat, and see, what kind of foods they prefer, and if there's a way to get sensory input in, even just through something like their snack or meal time. We also know that sometimes sucking is good for kids. So those water bottles with like a real thick straw, some of them you have to bite down and then suck out of at the same time. But that can also be another organizing way for kids to keep their arousal level down, and something that, again, you can kind of pack in their school lunch and they might be able to have access throughout the day. So now let's talk about some final takeaways. So the idea is, with a sensory diet, that by offering children 15 to 20 minutes of some structured, organized motor activities and exercises 2 to 3 times per day, that we actually might be able to have an impact on their ability to focus and attend and learn and stay in that just right place. Fidget items and pressure clothing and other oral sensory items can also be added to their sensory diet throughout the day to also help them regulate and keep their arousal level in a typical place. Again, we want to make sure that it's important to look at the child's routine. It takes a lot of time sometimes and planning and energy to make sure that we're giving kids the right exercises. So you just want to make sure that you're using them to your advantage so that they can pay attention to something or maybe learn a new skill that's otherwise challenging for them if they're ready and able to do so. And while sensory diets are important, it's also a lifestyle. I think it's it's something to keep in mind over the course of time, that maybe this is the type of structured routine that kids need day in and day out. And it will get easier to schedule over time as parents kind of figure out, oh, well, maybe they like to do different after school exercises and activities, extracurricular activities, but also give them sensory input. But it's a piece of the lifestyle that is most effective when it's used together with other interventions. So, whatever the child's difficulties are, that, parents are, continuing to follow up with doctors and counselors and social skills groups and their OT therapies through a sensory diet, working together, I think it's one great strategy that can help kids function.
Awesome. That's was a really great presentation, Keri. Really helped me actually kind of put all this stuff together. I just wanted to remind our audience out there, if you are watching, definitely ask questions. Just to ask a question, you can just type it in the chat box and we'll get to it. That said, I want to start with some of the questions that have already been asked. This question comes from a parent about motor breaks or sensory strategies that are already built into the school day. It looks like this parent has a program built in, and she's wondering, do these strategies or motor breaks, do they need to be done with an OT, or would it be okay for an OT to supervise or train a teacher? I think that's
a great question. I think no, they don't have to be done by an OT. As OTs, we work in the school system as part of a team, and that includes teachers and other professionals that are in the school building, as well as the child themselves. So I think the idea is that maybe the people on the child's team can come up with those exercises and strategies that work best for the child, and then somehow, again, looking at the routine, building it into the routine, and making sure that they have time to follow through with it throughout the day. But it certainly can be monitored by any adult that's in the building.
Okay. And a follow-up question to that, well, not quite a follow-up, but about another strategy, brushing. Can you talk about brushing, what it is, and just how it might fit into a sensory diet?
Yep. So Patricia Wilbarger, who we spoke about earlier, and Julia Wilbarger are occupational therapists that use an intervention called TheraPressure, or the deep pressure and proprioceptive technique. So what that is using a surgical scrub brush. It's a protocol that occupational therapists are often trained in. Using the surgical scrub brush, parents or caregivers are providing deep pressure input to a child's body, mainly their arms, their legs, and their back. So you use the brush in a certain way to give a child deep pressure, and then you follow it up with joint compressions. It's a fantastic intervention that I think can be very helpful for kids as a piece of the sensory diet. So just like we talked about fidget toys and weighted items and pressure clothing as a strategy that you can use for the sensory diet, to me that is another piece of the puzzle. But certainly I think it's important to find, first off, you want to make sure that your child is appropriate to receive that intervention. So speak with your occupational therapist about whether or not it might be appropriate. And then make sure that it's somebody that has been appropriately trained in the protocol, so that you have the best chance possible when you decide to fit it into your routine for it to be as successful as it can be.
Awesome. One of the topics that came up during your webinar was sort of the notion that kids don't want to stand out. And, this kind of, I don't know if the word for it is sort of stigma.
Right.
What are your sort of best solutions for kids in that middle, when it's really becoming an issue, that sort of middle school, high school, or even late grade school area, for trying to fit these in a way that's natural?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually I maybe should have even mentioned it before. The idea of, getting kids organized right from the moment their feet hit the floor in the morning from when they get out of bed. So sometimes it's, we don't want to necessarily rely on them having to do these exercises at school all the time. I do try to empower kids and parents to do as many activities as they can, before school and after school. So maybe, the middle school student gets up in the morning and does his exercise routine, gets dressed, then goes off to school. We talk a lot about, finding different strategies and maximizing those breaks. what are they doing on the, if they have a recess time, what are they doing? How can they talk to the teacher about maybe making sure that they have a few minutes extra built into their day to get more strategies. But ideally that is the goal. We want kids to be as independent as possible with as little equipment as possible. Seat cushions can be great, and some kids are really, they feel strongly about it. They know that it helps them, and they don't mind that they have a seat cushion on their chair. And others don't like, the way it looks to their friends. So we really talk about, other solutions and strategies that we can come up with together as a team to make sure that they feel comfortable, so that over time we're, maybe building up their exercise routine to be a little bit, to have more exercises, to have more time, and trying to hopefully scale back some of those other strategies that involve equipment or items that might make them look different to their peers.
That's a great answer. Thank you. Peyton, one of our parents online, has asked, she homeschools her son, and she does give breaks or short breaks, but the issue she's having is after she gives the break, she finds it hard to get the attention back to academics.
Okay.
Any suggestions or thoughts in that situation? Is it a question of how the break is structured or what type of exercises are there? Just want to get your take on that.
Yeah, so sometimes I'm not sure, if she's using visuals to help the breaks, but, again, having those pictures that kids can pull from and look at and set up on the chart where they, you sticky back Velcro them to laminate them, sticky back Velcro them to a piece of paper, and they pull them off, and then they're done. The idea is that with those same exercises that we talked about earlier, you want to do the ones that involve the head inversion and have as much stimulation. You want to try to do those first. And then you want to make sure that you end your routine with something like the dead bug or pushing the wall or the plank pose, where it's more deep pressure input rather than running around stimulation input, if that makes sense. So it's kind of like, for some kids, it's like if you were to go to an amusement park and ride a roller coaster, and then you get off the roller coaster and somebody hands you a piece of paper and says, okay, let's do work. They're just not in that place of being able to make that transition. So, after you've had the sensory experience, you want to, kind of bridge the gap by finding some exercises that really kind of help to calm them down. And then, maybe while he's in a dead bug yoga pose, you're giving him the instructions of what's going to happen next. So when we're done the dead bug yoga pose, we're going to transition to the table. You're going to sit down, pick up your pencil. It's going to be time for us to do math today. So you're giving them transitional information. You're preparing for what's coming next, and then giving them an activity to do in between to kind of help calm them down a little bit before they have to get back to work.
That was a great answer. I want to actually bring that video up if we can bring it up, because I think that, as I remember, when you're giving the presentation, you actually, the little obstacle course ends with a transitional sort of exercise, yes, a deep pressure. So I just wanted people to give that little bit of visual. He's doing the jumping jacks and then the other exercise, and he's having that sort of deep pressure transition, just for parents who are watching.
Right.
And then I'm going to go transition to the next question. This comes from Jamie. I think I know Jamie. His question is, his son has ADHD and is using a weighted blanket to help with sleeping. He's curious about how exactly the weighted blanket works. He's tried it himself and doesn't seem to be doing much for him, but is there any reason why, in particular, I think you went into a little bit, but what's the mechanism by which the weighted blanket makes sleep easier for these kids?
So the weight, first off, I would, check your blanket and check the weight of the blanket. Sometimes I find that kids prefer a much heavier blanket than we would think. And so the idea is that when they're lying down, they take this really heavy blanket. Many of them are filled with plastic poly pellets. They're pretty easy to clean and wash. And so they lie down, they put the blanket on them, and they're giving it's almost like a big hug. They're getting that sustained deep pressure to as many muscles and joints in their body as they can over a period of time. So it's supposed to be like a calming technique, so that when they get into bed, it helps them calm down and helps them fall asleep because they have better awareness and they're not as overstimulated. But again, the other piece is kind of looking at that bedroom, that bedtime routine. Is it, our kids running around and they're busy and they're excited, and then it's time to go to bed, and then they have a hard time kind of bringing their arousal level down from being overstimulated to then falling asleep. So maybe sometimes for some kids, we might say, okay, well, do your exercises about an hour before you want to go to bed, and then really try to plan and prepare for ways that you can give them the deep pressure input so that they're starting to come down, so that when they get into bed and they put the blanket on them, that's like the final step that allows them to drift off to sleep.
One question about the weighted blanket. Any safety concerns there that parents should know about, or is it just like a regular blanket?
No, I think as parents, you want to monitor it. You definitely want to make sure that your kids are able to have enough strength to, take it off their body and move it off of them. Otherwise, if it's too heavy and they can't get it off, then that certainly does pose to be a safety concern. But I think, most kids generally are able to put them on and take them off. Okay.
Okay, cool. We had a follow-up question from Peyton, one of our parents. She's, I think she mentioned where you had sort of like a little pictures and a Velcro with pull-off Velcro. She's asking if you mean like a daily schedule that they can pull things off of. I just maybe she's going to leave a little bit more explanation about it. I think she found it a very useful idea.
Absolutely. Yeah. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll go online. You can either take pictures of your kids doing the exercises with real photos, or you can, go online and find some pictures of kids doing very similar activities. And then what I'll do is I'll size them up so that they're maybe in little squares, and I'll print them all off, like maybe 12 different pictures of kids doing different exercises on one page. And then I'll cut them up and I'll laminate them. And then we'll have another page that's laminated with Velcro so that the kids can pull from their bank of strategies and exercises. They can choose which ones they want. They can put them in the order that they want to do them. Sometimes I might always require that they end with the dead bug yoga pose, or they end with pushing the wall, so that I know that they're making that transition from being overstimulated to then having to get back to work. But yeah, whatever works best for your child. But some kids like real pictures. Some kids are okay with illustrated drawings. Anything that kind of signals to them that when I see this photo, this is the exercise or the activity that I'm going to do.
Thanks, Keri. And Peyton, I hope that helps out. We did have one other question about sleep, helping your child sleep, and I think Keri already answered that. So if you ask that question, you feel free to speak up if there's an aspect of it you don't understand. But otherwise I'm going to move to our last question, which is a question I have. Let's say I am interested in sort of starting a sensory diet. My child has some sort of sensory processing issues. Is this something where I go to my OT? Do I go to the school? What's the first step here? Do I just try to give my kid exercises? I'm just wondering what the first step for my child would be.
I think it's a combination of things. Certainly, a lot of these exercises, that's kind of the beauty of them, is that, they're really just typical, ordinary exercises that anybody can do without any equipment. And just maybe try to follow the routine. If you pick 3 or 4 exercises and you do them, right when they get up in the morning, and maybe sometime midday, and right when they come home in the afternoon before they sit down and do their homework. Do you see that maybe these strategies are helping them to pay attention and function better? And at the same time, because the part that's hard with an OT evaluation is that there's a lot of time sometimes that happens in between when parents think something might be going on, and then they try to go about the steps to get some help, and there's a waiting list for an evaluation, or there's a waiting list. Some places have 6 months the waiting list for actual therapy. So I think these are some great strategies that you can try in the meantime while you try to make that decision of whether or not you need to seek out a more in-depth evaluation, and whether the child would need to benefit from more structured therapy, throughout the course of their week with a therapist.
Awesome. That's a great, we'll end it on that. That's a great answer. Thank you so much, Keri. This has been really helpful.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
And for those watching, just remember that for this chat and or this webinar and any of our other expert events, just go to u.org/calendar. I'd also encourage you to go to u.org/community to keep the conversation going, to share ideas with other parents, to figure out what might be working for your child and others. So please check out those resources, and thank you very much for joining us.